In the shadows of world-shaping battles, there are stories too quiet, too dangerous, too deliberately erased. Beneath the roar of tanks and bombers, whispers moved through pulpits, rail yards, mountain ruins, and icy seas. They were saboteurs, phantoms, forgotten warriors, some who vanished, others who should have. And once you hear their names, you can't unhear them. So open the file, if you dare to carry what history tried to bury. The wind that rolled over the Vistula River on the morning of November 17, 1942, carried with it the scent of coal smoke, damp stone, and quiet defiance. Warsaw, draped in gray under the weight of German occupation, pulsed with tension as armored trucks groaned through the city's scarred streets. But below the surface, beneath layers of soot and silence, a solitary man plotted a war of his own. Tomasz Lewandowski was a 38-year-old rail mechanic employed at the Oksy Repair Depot, a critical hub in the German military's rail network. A former Polish army engineer, he had avoided capture during the invasion of Poland in 1939 by faking his own death in a collapsed trench. After weeks wandering through woods and back roads, he re-emerged in Warsaw under false identity papers as Piotr Kaczmarek. For 3 years, he kept his head down, fixed locomotives, and memorized the timetables of Nazi supply trains heading eastward to the Eastern Front. His war began with a loose valve. One cold morning in January 1942, Tomasz sabotaged a Wehrmacht supply train by replacing a pressure release valve with a faulty duplicate. Somewhere near Białystok, the engine seized and burst into flames. No one traced it to him. Encouraged, he began crafting more elaborate disruptions, delayed brake systems, sanded down couplings, and carefully weakened axles. Each act of sabotage was precise, quiet, and timed to create confusion without immediate suspicion. He refused to join the Home Army directly. "The louder the resistance, the more they crush it," he once whispered to a fellow worker. But a whisper in the gears. No one hears it until the whole machine grinds to a halt. His sabotage was invisible, his methods so methodical that even the SS engineers suspected poor manufacturing from their own suppliers. To his colleagues, he was an introverted but dependable man, often working extra hours, speaking little, smoking alone. In June 1943, the Gestapo tightened their scrutiny after a train carrying panzer parts derailed and exploded near Lublin, killing 12 German soldiers. Tomasz had rigged the brakes on that convoy, but he was already back in Warsaw, tending to a broken axle on a troop transport bound for Minsk. Though suspicion fell on the Polish workers, the investigation found no direct evidence. But paranoia grew. Random arrests followed. Men disappeared overnight from the depot. Tomasz became more careful, using acid to weaken bolts and filing tiny notches into brake pads that would only crack under pressure after days of use. His closest ally was a widow named Zofia Wittek, a station clerk who typed manifests and timetables. Zofia, whose husband had died in the September campaign, fed Tomasz information. Car numbers, train routes, cargo details. They never spoke of politics. Instead, they met in silence behind the coal bunkers, trading scraps of paper, sometimes a glance, sometimes a crust of bread. She never asked what he did with the information. She only ever said, "Be careful." In the autumn of 1943, the Germans began transporting Jewish prisoners through Warsaw to forced labor camps and extermination centers. One evening, Zofia handed Tomasz a schedule marked "Special Transport, 600 persons." The train was set to depart for Treblinka at dawn. Tomasz acted that night, crawling beneath the wooden cars in the pitch black, using a file and wire to disable the couplers. At the next switching station, half the train uncoupled unexpectedly, rolling backward down a hill and smashing into an empty coal train. In the chaos, several prisoners managed to flee into the woods. The Germans executed 3 guards on the spot and began a brutal inquiry. This time, Tomasz's fingerprint was found on a lantern left near the tracks. Zofia was interrogated but said nothing. Under threat of torture, she admitted to knowing Piotr Kaczmarek, but insisted he was a quiet man who rarely left his workshop. Her silence bought him time. But betrayal came from elsewhere. Stanislav Zuk, a jealous co-worker who had once tried to court Zofia, had noticed Tomasz working late on certain nights. When offered a bottle of schnapps and an exemption from Eastern Front service, he told the Gestapo everything. Real name, background, military record, and even where Tomasz hid his old Polish officer's badge, wrapped in cloth under a floorboard in his boarding room. They came for Tomasz on December 2, 1943, at exactly 4:18 a.m. He was arrested without a fight. In the damp basement of Pauillac prison, he was beaten for names he refused to give. His trial, if it could be called that, lasted 10 minutes. The sentence was death by hanging at dawn. When asked for his final words, Tomasz only replied, "You'll hear my silence long after I'm gone." He was executed on December 9th in the prison yard. His body was never recovered. Zofia disappeared soon after. Some say she joined the resistance. Others believe she was sent to Ravensbrück. Her fate remains unknown. After the war, Tomasz's story lived on only in whispers. But in 1976, a Polish railway historian, the Ladislaw Borowski, unearthed a cache of secret NKVD documents in a Soviet archive. Among them were German reports detailing repeated sabotage incidents traced back to the Oksy depot. One file mentioned subject, Kaczmarek, possibly embedded saboteur. The name was underlined in red. Today, a rusted brake shoe, recovered from a derailed train near Białystok, rests in a glass case at the Warsaw Uprising Museum. Below it, a small plaque reads, Piotr Kaczmarek, Tomasz Lewandowski, mechanic. Sabotażysta. Bohater. He never held a rifle. Never led a charge. But for almost 2 years, he held back an empire, one train at a time. The Barents Sea, frigid and unforgiving, was a graveyard for many who dared cross it during the war. Between 1941 and 1945, over 70 Arctic convoys braved its icy waters to supply the Soviet Union with tanks, planes, and food. One such convoy, FS-88, left the Scottish port of Scapa Flow on the bitter morning of March 3, 1943, escorted by 2 destroyers and a light cruiser. By the time it was scheduled to arrive in Murmansk, it had disappeared without a trace. This is the story of that disappearance, a mystery buried in ice for decades. Convoy FS-88 was smaller than most, comprised of 9 merchant ships carrying critical supplies, American Shermans, British rations, medical equipment, and encrypted communication devices. The escort, led by HMS Dartmoor, included Commander Harold Pennock, a Royal Navy officer known for his obsessive caution and strained relationship with Soviet liaison officers. From the beginning, FS-88 was deemed non-priority due to its late dispatch and second-hand cargo, but what it carried would prove far more significant than the military realized. Trouble began within 24 hours of departure. The weather turned quickly. Horizontal snow blinded visibility. Ice accumulated on deck railings and gun barrels. Communications failed intermittently, forcing the ships to maintain strict radio silence. Despite these conditions, the convoy pressed forward, veering north of Bear Island, a known hunting ground for German U-boats. Commander Pennock was uneasy. He ordered zigzag patterns and depth charges every 6 hours, even when no sonar contacts were made. His crew muttered that he was chasing ghosts. Unbeknownst to them, they were being followed. From the frozen shadows emerged U-979, a German prototype submarine under the command of Captain Lieutenant Emil Weiss. It had been launched secretly from Kiel just weeks earlier, fitted with a then experimental Latchsvanger sonar decoy system, a bait pod designed to mislead British sonar pings by projecting false echoes. U-979's mission was to test this system against a live Allied convoy and report directly to Kriegsmarine headquarters. Weiss's logbook, recovered decades later in a hidden section of the Berlin Naval Archives, revealed chilling precision. March 4, 0400 hours, detected FS-88. Engaged stealth positioning. Sonar cloaked. No return ping. We are a phantom. At 11:17 p.m. on March 4th, FS-88 vanished. In London, Allied Command received a final encrypted ping, FS-88 proceeding under heavy snow, ETA plus 19 hours. Then silence. No distress signals. No Mayday flares. When search planes scoured the route days later, they found only fragments, a single lifeboat, half frozen, floating near the island of Hopen. Inside was one man. His name was Corporal Mikhail Petrov, a Soviet anti-aircraft gunner stationed on the merchant vessel Archangel. Delirious and frostbitten, Petrov was airlifted to Tromsø, where he spent months recovering. His account was dismissed as madness. "They came from below," he said. "No torpedoes. No explosions. Ships just cracked, crushed, pulled down." For decades, the fate of FS-88 was considered an unsolved anomaly. Some blamed drifting icebergs. Others suspected Soviet sabotage, citing the convoy's delivery of encrypted technology. But the truth remained hidden until 1982. During a joint Norwegian-Soviet oil expedition, sonar readings detected unnatural shapes on the seabed 120 kilometers northwest of Murmansk. A follow-up dive in 1983 confirmed what had long been suspected: the wreckage of Archangel and two other freighters, shattered but intact, resting in near-perfect alignment. There were no signs of torpedo damage. In 1991, with the fall of the Soviet Union, documents emerged suggesting the convoy carried not only supplies, but also Project Babel, a portable code-breaking relay designed to link Soviet intercept teams with Bletchley Park. This made FS-88 a target of immense value to German intelligence. When these documents were cross-referenced with Weiss's logbook, declassified in Germany the same year, a clear picture emerged. U-979 had shadowed the convoy for nearly 20 hours without detection. Its new sonar decoy allowed it to move between the escort ships unnoticed. But rather than use torpedoes, Weiss reported employing a technique called Schleichfluss, silent flow. Operating just beneath the convoy, the sub slowly released pressurized canisters of carbon dioxide beneath the keels of the ships. The resulting disturbance mimicked the beginning of ice flow compression, forcing several ships to turn off engines in fear of hull breach, essentially making them sitting targets. Then, in a method possibly never used before or since, U-979 launched depth mines beneath the immobilized hulls. One by one, the ships crumpled and sank. Commander Pennock went down with HMS Dartmoor, his last action a distress signal that never transmitted. A single lifeboat, launched in chaos, carried 4 men. Only Petrov survived. The Germans never revealed their success. U-979's mission was so secret that it was scrubbed from the Kriegsmarine logs after the war. The submarine itself vanished in April 1945, believed scuttled off the Norwegian coast to prevent capture. Its wreckage has never been found. In 2004, a BBC documentary aired newly colorized footage from the Tromsø Naval Hospital, including an interview with Petrov weeks after his rescue. Shown the recording in his old age, Petrov wept. "They said I lied," he whispered. "But the ice remembers." Today, a steel plaque stands on the cliffs of Murmansk, overlooking the Barents Sea. It bears the names of the 312 men lost aboard FS-88. Below them, a simple inscription in Russian and English. Asterisk, frozen in time. Forgotten no more. Asterisk. Monte Cassino was a mountain-turned fortress, an unyielding knot in the German Gustav Line that bled the Allies for months. Between January and May 1944, 4 separate assaults failed to break it. But history has largely forgotten the war's most unorthodox unit that fought there, a patchwork of outcasts, escapees, and ghosts led by a man history tried to erase. They called themselves Battalion X, but in truth, they had no official designation. The name was coined by Allied radio interceptors who caught encrypted German messages referring to X-Truppen, enemy infiltrators whose origins and loyalties were unclear. No flags, no dog tags, and no records. Only rumors. Only bodies. The story begins in the ashes of North Africa. Captain Armand Vachel had once been a decorated officer in the French Foreign Legion, fighting in Syria and Tunisia. But in 1942, after a violent dispute with a Vichy Line superior officer, Vachel was court-martialed and imprisoned in Algiers. When Operation Torch liberated the city, he escaped amid the chaos, vanishing into the underworld of displaced soldiers and deserters. By the time the Allies landed in Salerno in late 1943, Vishel had resurfaced in Naples with a reputation as a fixer, someone who could forge papers, barter weapons, and transport wounded men through German lines. But it wasn't until the Battle of San Pietro that he re-emerged as a commander. According to post-war interviews, Vishel formed his unit in the rubble of bombed villages, recruiting men who had no place in traditional armies, escaped POWs, partisan fighters, deserters, Jewish ghetto survivors, and even 2 former Italian Alpini soldiers who had turned on the fascists. Many of them had no names anymore. Some refused to speak at all. They were united by one thing: hatred of the Nazis and nothing left to lose. By January 1944, the German 10th Army held the mountain abbey of Monte Cassino like a dagger in the heart of Italy. Allied forces, under pressure from Churchill himself, launched repeated assaults up the valley. Vishel and his men, meanwhile, operated in the shadows of those failed offensives. Wearing scavenged Wehrmacht uniforms dyed with soot and blood, Battalion X infiltrated German supply convoys under cover of night. They ambushed fuel trucks, planted mines in switchbacks, and sabotaged radio towers deep behind enemy lines. The Allies didn't know who they were. The Germans assumed they were OSS commandos or rogue paratroopers. One of their most infamous missions occurred on February 9, 1944. Disguised as a German engineering crew, 8 men from Battalion X infiltrated a munitions depot east of Piedmont. Speaking perfect German, at least 2 of them were Austrians. They passed inspection, planted thermite charges, and destroyed 60% of the artillery shells intended for Cassino's defenses. Captured German field reports called it an act of surgical terrorism. The abbey itself, untouched by early Allied bombing for fear of destroying a cultural treasure, became the centerpiece of the battalion's most audacious plan. Vishel believed that the Germans were indeed using it as a lookout and arms cache, despite Nazi protestations. In late February, a team of 6 Battalion X members scaled the cliffs behind the abbey at night and penetrated its outer wall. What they found confirmed their suspicions. The crypts beneath the monastery were being used to store radio equipment and encrypted message logs. They also uncovered a half-buried body of a German paratrooper with orders signed by General Heydrich himself. Before leaving, they etched a cross into the wall beside the eastern transept, a mark used by Vishel's men to signify occupied. The next week, the Allies bombed the abbey. Controversy still surrounds the intelligence source that triggered the strike, but recently declassified British SOE reports refer obliquely to non-official partisan confirmation. That cryptic line is now widely believed to reference Vishel's raiders. As the battle intensified, Battalion X continued to wreak havoc, blowing up bridges ahead of German retreats, assassinating couriers, and even intercepting a wounded German colonel during a medical transfer. The colonel's documents provided Allied command with exact artillery placements near the Rapido River, a discovery that allowed the Indian divisions to push forward during the final assault in May. Despite their contributions, the battalion remained a ghost force. By the time Monte Cassino fell, only 18 of the original 47 members remained alive. Vishel himself was wounded during a skirmish near the Liri Valley, shot through the shoulder and rescued by New Zealand troops. When brought to a field hospital and asked for his unit designation, he reportedly said, "We are the bastards of no country. Right, X." After the war, the survivors of Battalion X scattered. Some returned to civilian life. Some disappeared into the ruins of post-war Europe. Vishel was last seen boarding a train in Marseille in 1946. His file remained classified until 1979, when French military historians uncovered records of his court-martial and letters written to the Vatican requesting clemency for war crimes he was later absolved of. In 2003, during restoration work in Monte Cassino's crypt, a monk uncovered a faded etching on the transept wall, a simple cross intersecting with the letter X. No medals, no parades, no names carved in stone. But for those months in 1944, in the shadow of that broken abbey, ghosts fought a war that history forgot. On the surface, Father Lorenzo Bellini was everything expected of the Vatican's chief choirmaster in wartime Rome: austere, soft-spoken, and obsessively devoted to liturgical perfection. His voice carried through St. Peter's Basilica like a dove in flight, and his choir, young seminarians and orphans, was renowned across occupied Europe. Dignitaries from Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and even neutral Switzerland attended his midnight masses to hear the music that floated between war and God. But behind the incense and psalms, Father Bellini was the most unlikely spy to operate inside Axis territory. He was known only by his SOE codename, Canary. Rome, 1943. The city had become a strange oasis, a neutral Vatican in the middle of fascist occupation. While German troops occupied the city and Mussolini's puppet republic sputtered north, the Vatican remained an island of extraterritoriality. Behind its guarded walls, political intrigue fermented like sacramental wine. The Allies needed eyes and ears, and Britain's Special Operations Executive saw opportunity not in generals or soldiers, but in a man of music. Father Bellini was approached not by agents in trench coats, but by an Anglican musicologist named Edward Canning posing as a music scholar. Their first meeting was brief. Canning complimented Bellini's composition style, then handed him a sheet of Latin hymnals with unusual punctuation. Inside the dots and slashes was hidden Morse code. The message was clear: Rome is bleeding. Your choir can stop it. Bellini agreed, not out of patriotism or money. He refused both, but out of conscience. Since 1941, he had secretly helped Jewish musicians hide in Vatican safehouses. He believed silence had become complicity. His choir would become a courier network. His first major operation was the orchestration of disinformation. Knowing that Axis spies regularly attended services at St. Peter's, Bellini began embedding coded phrases into choir programs and hymn selections. The SOE developed a cipher based on Gregorian chant patterns, particular sequences of notes that corresponded to military terms, dates, and locations. When the choir performed Dies Irae in the key of D minor, it meant a Luftwaffe division was preparing to move south. When they sang Ubi Caritas during a non-liturgical event, it indicated that German troop withdrawals were confirmed. The information was gathered through Bellini's daily confessions. Nazi officers and Italian generals, believing in the sanctity of the confessional, revealed more than they should. Bellini memorized their sins, along with their schedules, frustrations, and secrets, and reconstructed intelligence reports for the SOE using a typewriter hidden in a locked organ bench. In March 1944, Canary exposed one of his most daring finds: the location of the infamous Via Tasso Gestapo prison. Disguised as a parish priest delivering sacraments, Bellini smuggled out sketches of the prison layout drawn by a tortured partisan. These sketches were used by resistance fighters during the eventual liberation of Rome, allowing them to breach the prison walls and rescue 12 key resistance leaders. But the walls began closing in. The Abwehr, German military intelligence, received whispers of a mole inside the Vatican. A bishop sympathetic to the Nazi cause began asking questions. Bellini, increasingly paranoid, sent his final communiques in musical code hidden within wax cylinder recordings mailed to London under the pretext of a musical donation. The code within the harmonics signaled only 2 words: I am burned. It was not a full betrayal that doomed him, but a careless moment. On May 2, 1944, during a rehearsal, a choir boy found a page of typewritten text beneath the organ bench. The boy, curious, handed it to the wrong person, a secretary for the papal secretariat with fascist leanings. The document found its way into the hands of a German liaison officer. That night, Bellini was taken by plainclothes men just outside the Vatican gates. 4 weeks, he was held in a safe house, questioned but not tortured. The Germans, unsure whether exposing him would provoke Vatican outrage, kept his arrest secret. They tried to turn him, offered him safety in Spain, gold, even a bishopric. He refused all. His only request was that his choir be allowed to continue rehearsals. Eventually, pressure from the Pope's inner circle forced Bellini's release. But the man who returned to St. Peter's was not the same. Pale, thinned, and emotionally drained, he conducted only one more Mass, Pentecost Sunday, 1944. The final piece he conducted was his own composition, Vox Silentium, a choral lament that mixed Latin psalms with coded harmonics. To those listening, It was a somber farewell to those lost in war. But in London, WWII analysts deciphered its true meaning: German troop positions along the Garigliano River and a request to halt further Vatican operations. Weeks later, Rome was liberated. Father Bellini vanished in the post-liberation fog. Some say he was quietly moved to a monastery in Spain under papal protection. Others claim he was killed by Axis sympathizers. No grave has ever been found. In 1971, during renovations in the Vatican music archives, a hidden drawer was discovered behind a false panel in Bellini's former office. Inside were 6 wax cylinders, a silver crucifix etched with Morse code, and a diary page that simply read, "Asterisk, if you must fight evil, do not shout. Sing. Asterisk." To this day, the Vatican neither confirms nor denies Bellini's existence. But in the British National Archives, a declassified SOE dossier lists Operation Canary as one of the most effective intelligence channels within occupied Europe. At the bottom of the file is a final note, handwritten in red ink. "He sang in the enemy's cathedral and made them dance to our tune." On the evening of August 11, 1945, with the world teetering between fire and silence, Lieutenant Hiroshi Mori sat alone in the cockpit of a Mitsubishi Ki-43 Hayabusa, nicknamed Oscar by the Americans. The sun was bleeding into the horizon over Kyushu, and the sky, crimson, hazy, seemed to burn along with everything else in Japan. Mori's mission was clear: take off from Kanoya Air Base, fly due east over the Philippine Sea, and find the American carrier USS Antietam, believed to be part of Task Force 38. He was to die upon impact, crashing his aircraft, with its 250-kilogram explosive payload, into the enemy deck. He wore no parachute, no identification tag, only a silk scarf and a single Kanzashi hairpin from his younger sister, tucked in the flight map compartment. The Kamikaze Corps, or Takotai, had begun its desperate missions in 1944. By now, their pilots were ghosts before they even left the ground, ceremonially blessed, sake drunk, and sent to die with poetic finality. Mori, a reserved 23-year-old from Saitama Prefecture, had joined the Navy Air Service straight out of university. He was a literature student once, a poet. He had submitted haiku to local magazines under a pseudonym. Now, he was a weapon. He had written no farewell letter. Just one line scribbled in his flight manual: asterisk, even the cherry tree, when burned, does not bloom. Asterisk. At 1832, Mori's aircraft lifted off the airstrip with 7 other kamikaze pilots. But only Mori's plane continued east beyond radar range. The others either aborted due to mechanical issues or turned toward other targets. At 1912, his plane suffered engine failure, sabotaged unknowingly by rushed mechanics trying to stretch parts across too many aircraft. Mori crashed into the ocean near the uninhabited islet of Kumijima. He survived the crash. Battered, bleeding, and furious at fate for cheating him of a glorious death, Mori dragged himself onto the rocky shore. For days, he wandered, convinced that Japan still fought on. He built makeshift cover, rationed emergency rice balls, and waited for American patrols to arrive so he could die with honor in combat. But no patrols came. What Mori didn't know was that just hours after his mission launched, Emperor Hirohito had convened the Imperial Council and recorded the dual voice broadcast, his surrender speech. By August 14th, Japan had agreed to unconditional surrender. The war was effectively over. But no one told Mori. On August 15th, the sky above Kumijima lit up with American planes dropping leaflets announcing the surrender. Mori saw the fluttering papers but refused to believe them. "Enemy trickery," he whispered to himself. Instead, he interpreted their arrival as a sign: the enemy had come. He must resume his mission. That night, he fashioned a makeshift explosive using remaining aviation fuel, wire, and the damaged payload from his sunken plane. The next morning, he ambushed a U.S. Marine reconnaissance team who had landed nearby to install a weather station. The attack was brief but deadly. 2 Marines were injured, and one, Corporal James L. Vaughn, was killed. Mori was shot in the leg and captured after a brief struggle. His captors were stunned. The man they'd just subdued wore a kamikaze scarf, carried no firearm, and shouted "Tenno Hika Bonsai." Even after being restrained. The incident caused confusion in the command structure. The war was supposedly over, yet this man believed it had just begun. Interrogators initially assumed he was mentally unstable. He refused food, spoke only in formal court Japanese, and demanded to know why he hadn't been allowed to die. A Navy interpreter named Lieutenant Samuel Krieger eventually broke through. Using Mori's love of poetry, Krieger brought him a book of basho haiku. In the margins of one poem, Mori finally wrote a response. A war ended. But I am still burning. News of Mori's capture was suppressed. With the surrender in place, Allied command didn't want stories circulating about rogue Japanese soldiers attacking U.S. forces. Officially, the Marine casualty was attributed to unexploded ordnance. Mori was moved to a temporary detention camp near Okinawa under the pseudonym Prisoner A-122. In November 1945, he was transferred to a holding facility on Guam. Over several weeks, he was interviewed by American and Japanese officials compiling psychological profiles on kamikaze pilots. His testimony, recorded in translated transcripts, remained classified for over 50 years. In them, he described his final flight. The sky was not sad. It did not mourn me. I thought I would become wind, but the wind left me behind. When asked if he regretted surviving, he answered, "A blade that does not cut is not a blade. But perhaps it may write." In 1946, Hiroshi Mori was quietly released into the custody of a Shinto temple in Nagasaki, where he lived in obscurity for years. He adopted the life of a monk, never marrying, rarely speaking, and refusing to discuss the war. But in 1995, on the 50th anniversary of VJ Day, a small handwritten pamphlet appeared at the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum. It contained 17 poems, unsigned, but written in a recognizable style, sparse, fragile, and unmistakably his. The final poem read, "They called me fire, but I was only the smoke left after the end." Today, a modest stone stands on Kumajima's coast. It bears no rank, no nation, no symbol of war. Only a single engraved word, in Japanese and English, Mori. And underneath, in smaller script, "Not all who fall are dead." You've now seen what lives beyond the headlines and heroics, where loyalty blurs, silence kills, and survival is treason. These were the ghosts not etched in medals or memorials, the ones who screamed through silence. But once opened, these stories don't close. So ask yourself, how many more still lie beneath the rubble of accepted history, waiting to be unearthed? Or worse, waiting to be remembered?